I woke up in the middle of the night to find my wife, Emily, sneaking out of our bed, heading towards our neighbor S house. Our relationship with our neighbors, Mark and Lisa, had always been friendly and supportive. We shared barbecues, dinners, and our kids played together every day. But lately, Emily had been distant, and now I had a sickening suspicion about what was really going on. The sound of our bedroom door softly closing roused me from my restless slumber. Through bleary eyes, I watched as Emily tiptoed across the room, dressed hastily in jeans and a hoodie. She glanced back furtively, as if to ensure I remained asleep, before slipping out into the darkened hallway. My heart began to race as I considered the implications of her clandestine departure. Where could she be going at this hour, and why the need for such secrecy? I lay still, feigning sleep, as my mind churned with suspicion. Our marriage had seemed stable on the surface, but I couldn't ignore the recent changes in Emily's behavior, the hushed phone conversations, the unexplained absences, the emotional distance growing between us. Something was amiss, and I was determined to uncover the truth. Propelled by a surge of adrenaline, I rose from the bed, my bare feet padding softly on the carpeted floor. I crept to the window, peering out into the inky blackness of the night. There, in the faint glow of the streetlights, I spotted Emily's silhouette moving purposefully across our lawn, heading straight for Mark and Lisa's house. My breath caught in my throat as a wave of nausea washed over me. Could it be? Were my worst fears about to be realized? I knew I had to follow her to see with my own eyes what was transpiring. Hastily pulling on a pair of jeans and a dark hoodie, I slipped out the back door, careful not to make a sound. The cool night air prickled my skin as I moved stealthily through the shadows, maintaining a safe distance behind Emily. She navigated the terrain with practiced ease, clearly familiar with this covert path. My heart pounded in my ears as I watched her approach Mark's back door, a faint light glowing from within. Emily paused at the door, glancing around nervously before knocking softly. Moments later, the door swung open, revealing Mark's silhouette. What happened next sent a jolt of pain through my very core. Mark pulled Emily into a tight embrace, his hands roaming over her body with an intimacy that left no doubt as to the nature of their relationship. I crouched behind a bush, my stomach twisting in knots as they disappeared inside, the door closing behind them with a finality that echoed the shattering of my trust. The next morning, I found myself sitting across from Jake at our usual coffee spot, my hands wrapped tightly around a steaming mug. Jake had been my best friend since our college days, the one person I could always count on for support and advice. With a heavy heart, I recounted the events of the previous night, my voice trembling as I described the intimate scene I had witnessed. Jake listened intently, his brow furrowed with concern. When I finished, he leaned forward, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Mike, I am so sorry you are going through this," he said, his voice filled with empathy. "But before you confront Emily, you need to gather more concrete evidence, something she can easily deny." I nodded, knowing he was right. My word against hers would only lead to more denials and deflection. I needed irrefutable proof. That evening, I found Emily in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner. The normalcy of the scene was almost surreal in light of what I knew. Unable to contain my turmoil any longer, I confronted her. "Where were you last night, Emily?" I asked. My voice taut with barely suppressed anger. She froze, her eyes widening with shock before narrowing defensively. "What do you mean? I was here, in bed, with you." "Don't lie to me," I countered, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. "I saw you sneaking out, heading over to Mark's house." Emily's face flushed with indignation. "You were being paranoid, Mike. I would never do something like that. How could you even think it?" Despite her vehement denials, I could see the guilt flickering in Emily's eyes, the way her gaze darted away from mine. She was hiding something, and we both knew it. I pressed further, demanding answers, but she only grew more agitated, her voice rising in pitch as she deflected my questions. "I can't believe you don't trust me," she spat, turning her back on me. "After all these years, how could you accuse me of something so awful?" But the seed of doubt had been planted, and I knew I couldn't rest until I uncovered the truth. The next day, while Emily was at work, I took Jake's advice and installed a small, inconspicuous camera in our living room. It felt like a betrayal resorting to such measures in my own home, but I saw no other choice. I positioned the camera behind a picture frame, ensuring it had a clear view of the room, and tested it to make sure it was functioning properly. Now, all I could do was wait and watch. Over the next few days, I monitored the camera footage obsessively, my anxiety growing with each passing hour. I watched as Emily went about her daily routine, my heart aching at the glimpses of the woman I had once trusted implicitly. Then, on the third evening, it happened. Emily's phone rang, and I saw her expression shift as she glanced at the caller ID. Quickly, she answered, her voice low and urgent. "Hi, yes, I can talk now," she murmured, glancing around furtively. "No, he doesn't suspect anything. I'll be there in 15 minutes. With that, she grabbed her purse and hurried out the door, the camera capturing her every move. My heart sank as the reality of her betrayal began to sink in. Armed with the undeniable evidence from the camera, I steeled myself to confront Emily once and for all. My hands shook as I replayed the footage, the weight of her deception pressing down on my chest. I had loved her, trusted her, built a life with her, and now it all lay in ruins at my feet. Just as I was about to call Emily into the living room to face the truth, a knock sounded at the door. Startled, I made my way to the entryway and opened it to find Lisa standing there, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "Mike, I am so sorry to bother you," Lisa began, her voice trembling, "but I think our spouses are having an affair." The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I had already come to that conclusion myself. I invited Lisa inside, and together, we sat down on the couch, comparing the evidence we had gathered. She pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket, a love letter from Emily to Mark, filled with intimate details and promises of a future together. As I read the letter, tears blurred my vision, the betrayal cutting me to the core. Lisa and I sat in silence for a moment, united in our heartbreak and disbelief. Finally, Lisa spoke, her voice filled with determination. "We have to confront them, Mike. Together, we deserve the truth." I nodded, a sense of resolve settling over me. "You're right. We can't let them get away with this." We made a plan to confront Emily and Mark that very evening, agreeing to meet at Mark's house after dinner. As Lisa left, I felt a flicker of hope amidst the pain. At least I wasn't facing this alone. Together, we would demand answers and face the harsh reality that our marriages had been built on lies. With a heavy heart, I began to prepare myself for the confrontation to come, knowing that life as I knew it was about to change forever. Despite my confrontation with Emily, her nightly escapades persisted, each one a dagger twisting in my gut. The knowledge of her continued betrayal left me reeling, a constant ache that permeated every aspect of my life. I found myself watching the clock, dreading the moment when she would slip out of bed, her footsteps fading into the night as she made her way to Mark's house. Lisa and I had been working tirelessly to uncover the full extent of their affair, piecing together a timeline that stretched back far longer than either of us had initially suspected. The weight of their deceit was suffocating, a heavy burden that Lisa and I bore together, united in our pain and determination. Late one afternoon, Lisa and I met at a quiet cafe, away from the prying eyes of our neighborhood. Over steaming cups of coffee, we pored over the evidence we had gathered, our voices low and urgent as we shared our findings. It was clear that Emily and Mark's affair was not a fleeting indiscretion, but a carefully orchestrated deception that had been going on for months. "We have to do something," Lisa said, her eyes blazing with a mixture of hurt and anger. "We can't let them get away with this." I nodded, my jaw clenched tight. "I agree. We need to confront them together, force them to come clean about everything." We made a pact that day, a promise to stand united in our quest for the truth. Lisa and I had become more than just neighbors, we were allies, bound by the shared experience of betrayal and the desperate need for answers. As Lisa and I delved deeper into Emily and Mark's affair, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. We discovered hidden messages, secret gifts, and clandestine meetings that painted a picture of a long-standing, passionate relationship. Each new revelation was a blow to my already battered heart, a reminder of how little I truly knew about the woman I had pledged my life to. Late one night, as I sat in our dimly lit living room, I stumbled upon a cache of emails buried deep in Emily's computer. The timestamps stretched back for months, each message a testament to the depth of their betrayal. I read them all, my eyes burning with unshed tears, until the words blurred together and the screen swam before me. The constant stress and emotional turmoil took a heavy toll on my well-being. At work, I struggled to focus, my mind consumed by thoughts of Emily and Mark. I would catch myself staring blankly at my computer screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, paralyzed by the weight of my own despair. My performance suffered, and I could see the concern in my colleagues' eyes as I fumbled through presentations and missed deadlines. At home, the atmosphere was tense and oppressive. Emily and I orbited each other like strangers, our interactions stilted and cold. The silence between us was deafening, broken only by the occasional slamming of a door or the clatter of dishes in the sink. I longed for the warmth and comfort of the home we had once shared, but those days seemed like a distant memory, lost in the shadow of her betrayal. One evening, as I arrived home from another draining day at work, I was greeted by the sound of a door slamming shut. Emily jumped, startled by my sudden appearance, and quickly hid her phone behind her back. But not before I caught a glimpse of Mark's name on the screen, the text message still visible for a fleeting moment. "Who was that?" I asked, my voice tight with suspicion. "No one," Emily replied, her eyes darting away from mine. "Just a friend from work." I knew she was lying. The guilt was written all over her face, as plain as the text message that had disappeared from view. I wanted to confront her, to demand the truth, but something held me back. Perhaps it was the weariness that had settled deep in my bones, or the fear of what I might uncover if I pushed too hard. Feeling overwhelmed and desperate, I reached out to Jake, my oldest and most trusted friend. Over a few beers at our favorite bar, I poured out my heart, the words tumbling from my lips in a flood of pain and confusion. Jake listened patiently, his brow furrowed with concern, as I recounted the latest developments in the unfolding drama of my marriage. "You need to confront them, Mike," he said, his voice steady and resolute. "You and Lisa, together. It's the only way you're going to get the answers you need." I nodded, knowing he was right. The thought of facing Emily and Mark, of laying bare the truth of their betrayal, filled me with a mixture of dread and determination. But I knew I couldn't continue living in the shadows of their lies, allowing their deceit to poison every aspect of my life. Lisa and I met in secret, away from the watchful eyes of our spouses, to plan our next move. We agreed that a public confrontation was our best chance of getting Emily and Mark to come clean, to force them to face the consequences of their actions. We chose an empty lot near our neighborhood, a neutral ground where we could finally lay everything on the table. As the day of the confrontation approached, I could feel the tension building in my chest, a coiled spring of anxiety and anticipation. Lisa and I exchanged countless messages, bolstering each other's courage, reminding ourselves that we were in this together. The moment of truth arrived on a chilly evening, the sky above us heavy with the promise of rain. Lisa and I stood side by side, our hands clenched into fists as we watched Emily and Mark approach. The air crackled with tension, the weight of unspoken accusations hanging between us. "How could you do this to us?" Lisa demanded, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "How could you betray your own families?" Emily and Mark exchanged a glance, their faces etched with a mixture of guilt and defiance. They began to speak, their words tumbling over each other in a rush of justifications and excuses. Emily accused me of neglecting her, of being too focused on my work to notice her unhappiness. Mark claimed that his marriage to Lisa had been over long before the affair began, that they had simply been going through the motions for years. As the argument escalated, the truth began to unravel, layer by painful layer. Emily admitted that she had been unhappy for years, that she had turned to Mark for the love and attention she felt I had failed to provide. Mark revealed that their affair had begun during a particularly rough patch in our marriages, when both Lisa and I had been consumed by our own struggles and had failed to see the cracks forming in our relationships. Each new revelation was a knife to the heart, a fresh wave of betrayal that threatened to drown me in despair. I could see the same pain reflected in Lisa's eyes, the same sense of helplessness and rage that had taken root in my own soul. Just when I thought we had uncovered the full extent of their deceit, Mark delivered a final, devastating blow. With a defiant tilt of his chin, he announced that he was planning to leave Lisa, to move in with Emily, and start a new life together. They had been planning to tell us that very night, to finally come clean about the depths of their betrayal. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, the ground shifting beneath my feet. I could hear Lisa's sharp intake of breath, see the color drain from her face as the reality of Mark's words sank in. The betrayal was deeper and more calculated than either of us had ever imagined, a premeditated plan to destroy the lives we had built together. In the aftermath of Mark's revelation, Lisa and I found ourselves adrift, our lives shattered beyond recognition. We clung to each other like shipwreck survivors, the only constants in a world that had been turned upside down. We made the painful decision to separate from our spouses, to begin the long and arduous process of divorce. It was a relief, in a way, to finally take action, to start moving forward instead of languishing in the limbo of their lies. But it was also a source of immense sorrow, the death of the dreams we had once cherished, the loss of the futures we had imagined together. Late one night, as Lisa and I sat together in her living room, the remnants of our lives scattered around us in half-packed boxes, we found ourselves reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this moment. The betrayal had changed us, hardened us in ways we had never anticipated. But it had also forged a bond between us, a shared understanding of the pain and resilience of the human heart. We raised our glasses in a silent toast, a promise to each other and to ourselves. We would survive this. We would rebuild our lives from the ashes of our shattered marriages. And we would emerge stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to find the happiness and love we deserved. As the night wore on and the wine flowed, we allowed ourselves a moment of laughter, of levity in the midst of the chaos. We traded stories of happier times, of the dreams we had once harbored for our futures. And in that moment, I felt a flicker of hope, a glimmer of possibility amidst the darkness. The road ahead would be long and difficult, fraught with challenges and setbacks. But I knew with a certainty that came from the depths of my soul that I would not walk it alone. Lisa and I had each other, a bond forged in the fire of betrayal and tempered by the strength of our own resilience. Together, we would face whatever the future held, armed with the knowledge that we had survived the worst that life could throw at us. And we would emerge victorious, our heads held high and our hearts open, as if the pain of Emily's betrayal wasn't enough. The aftermath of her affair with Mark took on a life of its own. Rumors spread through our tight-knit community like a malignant growth, spreading faster than I could contain them. Everywhere I went, I felt the weight of curious stares and hushed whispers, the pity and judgment of those who had once called themselves our friends. Each encounter was a fresh humiliation, a reminder of the shame that now clung to me like a second skin. I found myself avoiding social situations, dreading the inevitable questions and well-meaning condolences that only served to twist the knife deeper into my wounded pride. The grocery store, once a mundane errand, became a gauntlet of whispers and sideways glances. As I navigated the aisles, I overheard snippets of conversation, my name and Emily's tangled together in a sordid web of speculation. The knowing looks and abrupt silences that greeted me at every turn were a constant reminder of my failure, of the marriage that had crumbled beneath the weight of deceit. Even the neighborhood meetings, once a source of camaraderie and shared purpose, became an ordeal. I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on me as I took my seat, the unspoken questions hanging heavy in the air. The minutes dragged by in an endless parade of meaningless discussions, my mind consumed by the knowledge that my personal life had become fodder for idle gossip. In the midst of the chaos, Lisa became my lifeline, the one person who truly understood the depth of my pain. We spent long evenings together, pouring our hearts out over glasses of wine, sharing our fears and our hopes for the future. In her company, I found a measure of solace, a reminder that I was not alone in my struggle. It was during one of these conversations that we made a pact, a promise to each other and to ourselves. We would move out of the neighborhood together, leaving behind the painful memories and the suffocating weight of judgment. The decision brought with it a flicker of hope, a glimpse of a future unburdened by the mistakes of the past. The process of filing for divorce was a necessary evil, a step towards the closure we both so desperately craved. Lisa and I met with our lawyers, our hands shaking as we signed the papers that would sever the ties that had once bound us to our spouses. It was a bittersweet moment, a mix of sorrow and relief, as we took the first steps towards reclaiming our lives. The legal proceedings were a drain on our already fragile emotional reserves, but we leaned on each other for support, finding strength in our shared determination to move forward. Each meeting with our lawyers, each court date, brought us one step closer to the freedom we so desperately sought. As the date of our move approached, Lisa and I threw ourselves into the task of packing up our belongings. It was a daunting process, sifting through the detritus of our shattered marriages, deciding what to keep and what to leave behind. Each item held a memory, a reminder of happier times that now seemed like a distant dream. We worked side by side, our movements in sync as we boxed up the remnants of our lives. The physical act of packing became a form of therapy, a way to process the pain and the anger that still lingered beneath the surface. With each box sealed and labeled, we felt a sense of lightness, a glimmer of hope for the future that awaited us. Just when we thought we had weathered the worst of the storm, Mark appeared on Lisa's doorstep, his face twisted with a mixture of rage and desperation. He demanded to speak with Lisa, his voice rising with each refusal, until the commotion drew the attention of the neighbors. Lisa tried to reason with him, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her. But Mark was beyond reason, his anger fueled by a sense of entitlement and a refusal to accept the consequences of his actions. He pushed past her, forcing his way into the house, his eyes wild with a dangerous intensity. I arrived on the scene just as the argument reached a fever pitch, Mark's voice echoing through the house like a thunderclap. Without hesitation, I stepped between them, my body a shield against the fury that emanated from him in waves. The confrontation quickly escalated into a physical struggle, a tangle of limbs and shouts that spilled out onto the front lawn. Neighbors gathered, drawn by the commotion, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid fascination. I grappled with Mark, my muscles straining against his as we fought for control. The world around us faded away, narrowing to the pounding of my heart and the taste of blood in my mouth. The arrival of the police was a blur, a flurry of flashing lights and shouted commands. They pulled us apart, their hands rough as they restrained Mark, his face contorted with rage. I stood panting, my body aching from the exertion, as the officers took statements from the gathered crowd. The gravity of the situation began to sink in, the realization that our private struggles had spilled out into the public eye. I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me, a bone-deep weariness that seemed to seep into every fiber of my being. It was then that Emily appeared, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed from crying. She pushed through the crowd, her movements frantic as she sought me out. When she reached me, her words tumbled out in a rush, a confession that landed like a punch to the gut. She was pregnant, and she didn't know who the father was. The revelation hit me like a physical blow, a sickening twist of fate that left me reeling. I stared at her, my mind struggling to comprehend the implications of her words, the betrayal that cut deeper than anything that had come before. The weight of Emily's confession, combined with the stress of the altercation and the public humiliation, proved too much to bear. I felt something inside me break, a dam bursting under the pressure of too much pain and too much anger. The tears came then, hot and fierce, a flood of emotion that I was powerless to stop. I sank to the ground, my body racked with sobs as the full extent of my loss hit me. Everything I had known, everything I had built my life around had been ripped away, leaving me adrift in a sea of uncertainty and despair. Through the haze of my breakdown, I felt Lisa's arms wrap around me, her presence a lifeline in the midst of the chaos. She held me as I wept, her own tears mingling with mine, a shared grief that bound us together in a way that nothing else could. In that moment, I clung to her like a drowning man, desperate for the comfort and understanding that she offered so freely. Her strength became my own, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, I was not alone. As the dust settled and the police dispersed, Lisa and I found ourselves once again in the midst of our half-packed belongings. The events of the day had only reinforced our resolve to leave, to start fresh in a place untainted by the memories of our shattered marriages. We resumed our packing with a newfound sense of urgency, a determination to put the past behind us once and for all. Each box became a symbol of our liberation, a tangible reminder of the future we were building together. And though the road ahead was uncertain, though the wounds of betrayal were still raw and bleeding, I knew that with Lisa by my side, I had the strength to face whatever lay ahead. Together, we would forge a new path, one step at a time, until the pain of the past was nothing more than a distant memory. Emily's pregnancy announcement was the final blow, a crushing revelation that left me reeling in its wake. The uncertainty of the child's paternity, the possibility that it could be Mark's or mine, was a sickening twist of fate that I couldn't begin to comprehend. The betrayal that had already cut me to the core now took on a new, even more insidious dimension. I felt utterly defeated, lost in a sea of despair and hopelessness that threatened to consume me entirely. The future that I had once imagined, the life that Emily and I had built together, lay in ruins at my feet. And now, with the added complication of a child, I found myself at a complete loss, unsure of how to move forward or where to turn. In the days that followed Emily's announcement, I retreated to the solitude of my bedroom, unable to face the world beyond those four walls. The weight of my emotions, the sheer magnitude of the pain and betrayal, was too much to bear. I broke down completely, my body racked with sobs as I finally allowed myself to fully feel the depth of my despair. I had never experienced such a profound sense of hopelessness before, a feeling of utter defeat that seemed to permeate every fiber of my being. The tears flowed unchecked, a physical manifestation of the grief and anger that had taken root in my heart. I was a broken man, shattered beyond recognition by the actions of the woman I had once loved more than life itself. As the initial shock of Emily's revelation began to wear off, I found myself sinking deeper into a state of isolation and self-pity. I couldn't bring myself to face the world outside, to confront the reality of my situation head-on. Instead, I cocooned myself in the familiarity of my own misery, wallowing in the depths of my despair. I spent hours sitting in the dark, the curtains drawn tight against the outside world, replaying the events of the past few months in an endless loop. I questioned every decision I had made, every moment that had led me to this point. The weight of my own perceived failures, my inability to see the signs of Emily's betrayal, crushed down upon me like a physical burden. It was in the midst of this darkness, this all-consuming despair, that a flicker of clarity began to emerge. Slowly, painfully, I came to the realization that remaining in this toxic environment, surrounded by the memories of my shattered marriage, would only serve to prolong my suffering. I needed to take control of my life, to break free from the chains of the past and forge a new path forward. The decision to move away, to focus on my career and my own personal growth, was a daunting one. But it was also a lifeline, a glimmer of hope in the midst of the chaos. I knew that I couldn't continue to wallow in my own misery, to allow Emily's betrayal to define the course of my life. I had to take action, to seize control of my own destiny before it was too late. With newfound determination, I threw myself into the task of starting over. I began to look for job opportunities in other cities, places where I could begin to rebuild my life from the ground up. I scoured listings for apartments, seeking out a space that could become my own personal sanctuary, a haven from the pain of the past. As I packed up my belongings, sorting through the detritus of my failed marriage, I felt a mix of fear and excitement churning in my gut. The prospect of leaving behind everything I had known, of venturing out into the unknown, was terrifying. But it was also exhilarating, a chance to start fresh and create a new life on my own terms. With the move complete, I threw myself into my work with a renewed sense of purpose. I had accepted a job offer in a new city, a position that promised growth and stability in equal measure. The long hours and demanding workload became a welcome distraction, a way to channel my energy into something productive and meaningful. I found solace in the structure and routine of my new job, in the sense of accomplishment that came with each successful project. Slowly but surely, I began to regain my sense of self-worth, to rebuild the confidence that had been shattered by Emily's betrayal. The focus on my career became a lifeline, a way to reclaim the parts of myself that I had lost in the aftermath of my marriage's demise. But my journey of healing wasn't limited to the professional sphere. I knew that I needed to work on myself, to address the emotional wounds that Emily's actions had left behind. I began attending therapy sessions, delving deep into the root causes of my pain and learning new coping mechanisms to help me move forward. I also rediscovered old hobbies and passions that had fallen by the wayside during my marriage. I joined a local gym, channeling my anger and frustration into physical activity. I picked up a paintbrush for the first time in years, losing myself in the creative process and allowing my emotions to flow onto the canvas. And I reached out to old friends, rebuilding connections that had been neglected in the chaos of my personal life. Throughout this process of self-discovery and healing, Lisa remained a constant presence in my life. Our shared experience of betrayal and heartbreak had forged an unbreakable bond between us, a connection that went deeper than mere friendship. We became each other's support system, a lifeline in the midst of the storm. We met regularly for coffee dates and long walks in the park, sharing our struggles and celebrating our victories. Lisa's strength and resilience were a constant source of inspiration, a reminder that it was possible to survive even the deepest of wounds. With her by my side, I began to believe that I could emerge from this ordeal stronger and more whole than ever before. Of course, the process of legally dissolving my marriage to Emily was a painful and emotional one. The endless meetings with lawyers, the mountains of paperwork, and the constant rehashing of old wounds took a toll on my already fragile psyche. But with Lisa's support and the knowledge that I was taking steps towards a better future, I found the strength to persevere. The day that our divorce was finalized was a bittersweet one. As I signed the papers that would sever the legal ties between us, I felt a mix of relief and sadness wash over me. The marriage that I had once believed would last a lifetime had come to an end. But with that ending came the promise of a new beginning. In the months that followed, both Lisa and I began to build new lives for ourselves. We moved to different parts of the city, seeking out spaces that could become our own personal sanctuaries. I found an apartment that felt like home from the moment I stepped inside, a place where I could begin to create new memories untainted by the past. As I settled into my new routine, I felt a sense of peace and possibility that had been missing for longer than I cared to admit. The wounds of my failed marriage were still raw, but they no longer consumed me in the way they once had. I was learning to live with the pain, to embrace it as a part of my story rather than allowing it to define me. It was nearly 6 months after I had moved out that I received an unexpected letter from Emily. I stared at the familiar handwriting on the envelope, my heart racing as I tried to imagine what she could possibly have to say after all this time. With shaking hands, I tore open the envelope and began to read. The contents of the letter hit me like a physical blow. Emily revealed that the child she was carrying was indeed Mark S., and that their relationship had crumbled under the weight of constant fighting and recrimination. She apologized for the pain she had caused, expressing remorse for her actions and wishing me well in my new life. I sat at my kitchen table, the letter clutched in my hands, as a mixture of emotions washed over me. The pain of Emily's betrayal, the anger and resentment that had consumed me for so long began to give way to a sense of closure. Her words, while difficult to read, provided a sense of resolution that I hadn't even realized I needed. In the days that followed, I found myself returning to Emily's letter again and again. Each reading brought with it a new wave of emotions, a fresh perspective on the events of the past year. But with each passing day, I felt the weight of the past beginning to lift from my shoulders. Emily's admission of guilt, her acknowledgement of the pain she had caused, was a validation of my own experiences. It was a reminder that I was not to blame for the breakdown of our marriage, that her actions were her own and not a reflection of my worth as a partner or as a man. As I began to integrate this newfound sense of closure into my life, I felt a renewed sense of hope and possibility. The wounds of my failed marriage would always be a part of me, a reminder of the pain and heartbreak that I had endured. But they no longer held the power to define me or to dictate the course of my life. I looked out the window of my new apartment, taking in the bustling city streets below. The world seemed full of promise, a canvas waiting to be painted with the colors of my own choosing. I knew that the road ahead would be challenging, that there would be obstacles and setbacks along the way, but I also knew that I had the strength and resilience to face whatever came my way. As I turned away from the window, my gaze fell upon a small framed photo of Lisa and me, taken during one of our coffee dates. The image was a reminder of the bonds that had been forged in the fire of shared pain, of the friendships that had sustained me through the darkest of times. I realized then that the true revenge against those who had betrayed us was not to wallow in anger or bitterness, but to live our lives to the fullest, to find joy and purpose in the face of adversity, to build a future that was entirely our own. And so, with a heart full of hope and a newfound sense of purpose, I stepped out into the world, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. The past was behind me, a distant memory that no longer held sway over my present or my future. And though the scars of my failed marriage would always be a part of me, I knew that I had the strength to rise above them, to create a life that was full of love, laughter, and endless possibility.